Hello, everyone. We are joined today by Adrie Fourie, the head of the Department of Sustainable Development at the international consulting firm Solid Green Consulting, which is based out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Today, we will be talking about her work with the City of Johannesburg and as a consultant on various eco-districts related projects. So welcome, Adrie. I was wondering if you could first just tell me about a place that's special to you and what makes it part of your story.
Hi, Tiba. Thank you for having me. I think as a South African, I have to start by talking about the Kruger National Park. I grew up and we always used to spend holidays going to the African bush, um, driving around for hours, looking at the animals if we can spot them, nights spent next to a big bonfire, listening to the animal sounds, and that was a memory I always treasure. But it's also something that made me realize it's those spaces that we have to treasure, that we have to make sure that development is also always contained in spaces that never reach there. We have to keep those spaces sacred and special and protect them. But also during the past 2 years of lockdown, South Africa had quite an extensive portion of time where it was work from home. And for me, I was lucky enough that I had a space that was safe, it was set up in a way that I can have a home office, I have a garden. And that also made me realize that this is what all South Africans deserve. They deserve to have development that provides them with this type of security and healthy space. So this is what I'm trying to bring into the work I do under my department. So yeah, those are the two big things that motivate me.
Ah, thank you so much. And how do you feel the context of being South African has informed your definition of equity and justice? And how do you define equity and justice?
Um, Firstly, I have to just acknowledge being a white South African, I have a lot of privilege, and I acknowledge that. And I carry that with me through all the work I do. And I think with the eco district work, you just become more aware of it and you try and bring that into the conversation as much as you can, because that is also one of the big elements of eco district, as you know, which is equity. So you're constantly trying to bring in the conversation, trying to make people aware of the racial bias that they carry with them. Most often it's unknowingly. Sometimes it is just a conversation that you need to make sure that people are having, get them comfortable with having that conversation. And for me, really, equity is making sure that everybody gets the support they need, whatever that might look like. So it would be different in different scenarios, in different projects. So really, you need to understand the specific context of the project you're working on for that to make sense.
Yeah, no, and how do you feel like growing up and working within South Africa has like shaped that as opposed to in the United States where we try to ignore like our history of white supremacy and all of the tremendous history of enslavement and issues with racism. I feel like, at least as an outsider of South Africa, I feel like you really acknowledge as a culture the fact that you had apartheid and all of these different racial disparities for so long, and there's active work to address it as opposed to just sort of talking around the issues like we do in the United States a lot of the time. So
Yes. Yep.
oh,
Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I didn't feel like I articulated the rest of the question. So, how do you feel like that, as a culture, has impacted your view on equity and justice?
It's a good question. It's a difficult question to answer, and I do think once again I do want to acknowledge the fact that I am a white South African, and I probably don't know the full story. I definitely don't know the full story, and I want to just mention that I definitely am not speaking for South Africa as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I do think we do tend to have more open conversations about it. Our government does do active policy development around ensuring that the wrongs of the past are corrected and that there are policy implementation tools in place to actively promote addressing the challenges that we faced, whether that is Black economic empowerment, employment equity. There's various tools that are in place. I don't necessarily think that the tools are as effective as one would hope. And I do think there are still conversations that should still happen, that should still continue. And I also think there is, I don't think the US is in its own that there are still conversations that are not being had. I think that will always happen, that there are certain things that are just, the society might not be ready for it, and certain conditions are just not right, unfortunately. So no society is perfect, but I think we are really doing good work. And I think with tools like eco-districts and implementing that in projects, we are making more people aware of the, as I mentioned earlier, the racial biases that they carry around. Not even just racial bias, any bias that they carry around, whether that's gender or any other bias. And the more aware people are, the more they take that awareness with them in other facets of their life. And I think that's the sort of change that we want to bring about in the sustainability work that we do in the sustainable cities that I would want to see created. So that's really sort of what we want to see being done. So we want to be the change. So that's why we're leading the charge and doing the eco-district work in South Africa.
Thank you. I so appreciate that context. I know in previous conversations that you had mentioned that you've worked with the City of Johannesburg to really utilize the eco-districts framework. Can you elaborate on the work that you're doing, and what are some ways that Johannesburg and the national South African government have been addressing urbanization?
Thanks. Yes, so the City of Joburg is one of our major cities that have all come together, and they've done work with the C40 organization. And as part of that commitment, they have been looking at ways to make that more practical, both for developers as well as themselves. And one of the tools that they are investigating, and which we have been appointed to do for them, is investigate the eco-district methodology. So the work that we're doing is we're looking at a specific node in Joburg where we are testing the methodology. We are developing a energy use and carbon emissions calculation tool. And then once we have that methodology and calculation tool set up, we'll also then start identifying the interventions that can decarbonize. And what we are hoping to achieve is identifying ways that they can then change city policy to help them scale that up and replicate that throughout the city of Joburg. And then ultimately what the hope is that this process can then be taken on the road, and we can go to other places and other towns and show them this is the work, this is the benefit, and this is how you can use this methodology in your city to help them or to help you with moving to net zero carbon, whether that's with the first commitment they've made to net zero carbon in new buildings by 2030 or for existing buildings by 2050. So the premise stays the same, and it dovetails with eco-districts moving to carbon neutrality at a future date. So it works quite well.
That sounds fantastic. Are there any national projects that are also trying to get the whole, like, is there funding or any sort of resources being brought in from the national South African government to push toward carbon neutrality?
There is a commitment from various government departments to definitely support the movement to sustainability. And for instance, the National Department of Public Works has made a serious commitment to only take up office space in buildings that have been Green Star certified. So Green Star is our voluntary local green building certification tool. So that already shows a significant commitment. And then there are other approaches where they are also looking at bringing in the 1.5-degree targets into our national policies, guiding what local cities should be doing in terms of perhaps bringing in mandatory legislation, and looking at what different sectors should be doing. So there's definitely policy changes coming in. Funding, I'm not completely sure. I do think that's still limited, but there are a lot of global funding organizations that are looking at supporting South African projects. So yeah, if people are interested, they can reach out to me and I can always share more information.
Thank you. And what do you feel needs to be accomplished in order to have more equitable and sustainable development practices? And what are some hurdles to overcome in achieving these?
I think really just the willingness to have the conversation, to be open and to other views, to listen, and to invite more people into the room, get them around the table, and give people a voice. We find a lot more projects are successful if people are given an opportunity to provide effective input, and a project is not just planned for them and implemented without really engaging them into the process. And I've seen that in my work as a development economist before I moved into the sustainability work. Really, if you want someone to take ownership, get them involved early on, have those difficult conversations, get their input. And yeah, if we can work on removing more bias, work on getting equity into the mix, and also justice, getting the whole, and this is where I love Tamika Butler's work, where she always has that diagram where you have the reality and equality and equity, and the last element of the slide where she shows justice, and it's always 3 people at a baseball game, and the fence is removed and no one's standing in a box, and the conversation is completely not even do you want to watch the baseball game, but maybe you're there for the marketing rights and the music being played. And so it really is understanding what the systemic barriers in any given situation is for anyone, and making sure people are having the conversation they want to have about the situation. So I do think if that can happen, a lot of the challenges can at least be addressed and be brought to the front.
Thank you. How do you feel that eco districts fits into that work? And can you tell me a little bit about the different eco districts projects that you've been working on?
So eco districts is really a useful tool to start having the conversation. I think a lot of South African developers are very used to the Green Star rating system I mentioned earlier. A lot of our developers see the value in going for certifications, being awarded or rewarded for the good work they're doing. And Eco District takes it that one step further, where they already have to start reporting on the carbon emissions reduction work they're doing, whether it's through GRESB or the global greenhouse gas emission protocol. So they already see the value in just making that connection, because ultimately you'll be reporting on your performance through Eco District. But more importantly, it gives us the opportunity to start the conversation about equity, resilience, and what does that mean? And not just thinking about your own organization, but what would it mean for the community around your development? And then climate protection. Is there perhaps a bigger conversation to be had about renewables, about potential carbon offset projects? So we've had a conversation with one of the eco-district projects we're working on at the moment, where they realize that there is only so much you can do in terms of offsetting what you're doing in your own development. So you have to start looking at carbon offsets. And then there's questions about the type of carbon offset projects that are already existing, and can they potentially get involved with something to be a more sustainable source for other projects. So making a larger commitment to that carbon offset project. So that's also something that we've been investigating. So at the moment, some of the projects we can't necessarily mention yet, but we have quite a number of projects that are definitely interested. We are doing a new development, so starting from scratch, looking at the tool. They're very excited. They have to think about things like, how do you put it into an agreement up front so that everybody is bound by the same conversation, and that it will stay part of the conversation for the next 10, 20, 50 years, so that you make sure that it's a commitment that's made. We've also used the eco-district methodology in work that we've done for the University of Johannesburg. And they were very interested in just seeing how we've taken the methodology, but we've incorporated some of their own vision and mission thinking, and their own shaping of their long-term vision into the process. So we see a lot of value in not necessarily just going for a certification, but using the process. And I think that's where the value of EcoDistrict sits. It really isn't just about getting that stamp at the end. It is that process, that changing the conversation, having the conversation, and then getting people to see the value of the changes it can have, or it can affect. So it really is, I love it. I'm a little bit of a fangirl.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being such a strong advocate for the work that we do and the work that you do. And it's always a joy to talk to you. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview with me. I so appreciate it. And I'm excited that our broader AP community and beyond gets to hear about the invaluable work that you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Bye.
Bye.